The invitation came so casually that I almost missed its weight. "Hey, Ethan," Lucas Carter said after practice, his voice steady, familiar to half the campus. "You wanna come by my dorm later? Just talk." Lucas was the football captain, the kind of guy whose name carried echoes in hallways. Confident stride, easy smiles, a future that seemed already written for him. I was none of those things. I was the quiet one who took notes for others, who watched more than he spoke. The fact that he had noticed me at all felt unusual. The fact that he wanted to talk felt dangerous, that I told myself it was harmless. That captains talked to teammates all the time. Still, something in his eyes lingered longer than necessary, as if he was asking a question he didn't dare to voice. Lucas had a girlfriend. Everyone knew that. Emily Carter, his high school sweetheart, his constant. Her photos were framed in his social media like proof of stability. That knowledge should have been enough to keep me away. It wasn't. That night, his dorm room smelled faintly of detergent and cold air. The walls were crowded with trophies, framed jerseys, reminders of a life built on applause. Lucas shut the door behind me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence felt intentional, as if words would complicate something already fragile. "Sorry it's messy," he said, though it wasn't. He always liked things controlled. That I sat on the edge of his bed while he leaned against his desk, arms crossed, posture relaxed but guarded. We talked about classes at first. About the upcoming game. Normal things. Safe things. But Lucas wasn't good at pretending for long. His gaze drifted, his answers shortened, until eventually he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Do you ever feel like you're playing a role you didn't audition for?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. Lucas was the last person I expected to hear that from. He had everything people wanted: respect, attention, certainty. I chose my words carefully, sensing this moment mattered. "Sometimes," I said. "I think a lot of people do. They just hide it differently." He nodded slowly, as if relieved I hadn't laughed. "Everyone expects me to know who I am. What I want. But I don't think I ever had the space to figure that out." I noticed how he avoided saying Emily's name. How he spoke in generalities, like he was circling something too sharp to touch. There was vulnerability there, but also confusion, dangerous confusion. I reminded myself that listening didn't mean agreeing, that empathy wasn't betrayal. Still, I felt the ground shift beneath that logic. Lucas sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth from his arm. He didn't look at me when he spoke next. "With you, I don't feel like I have to perform." The honesty in his voice unsettled me. I was used to being invisible, not essential. "Lucas," I said carefully, "you have people you can talk to." "I know," he replied. "But they see the version of me I give them. You don't." That was the moment I should have left. Instead, I stayed. I told myself I was just being kind, that nothing inappropriate was happening. But kindness doesn't usually feel like this: charged, uncertain, heavy with implications. Lucas leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it held answers. "Emily deserves better than someone who doesn't know himself," he said quietly. The sentence hung between us, incomplete and unsettling. He wasn't confessing to wrongdoing, but he was admitting to absence, emotional, intentional absence. I understood then that whatever this was, it wasn't innocent. Emotional distance leaves room for replacements, even accidental ones. "I don't want to be a mistake," I said before I could stop myself. Lucas finally met my eyes. There was something raw there: fear, curiosity, restraint. "Neither do I." We sat in silence again, but it felt different now. He didn't reach for me. I didn't move away. The restraint itself felt intimate, like we were both acknowledging a boundary without naming it. Outside, laughter echoed down the hallway, a reminder that the world hadn't paused for us. When I stood to leave, Lucas didn't try to stop me. He only said, "Thanks for coming." I nodded, my chest tight with thoughts I didn't want to claim yet. As I stepped into the hallway, I knew one thing with unsettling clarity: this conversation wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a choice neither of us was ready to face. I told myself I wouldn't go back to Lucas Carter's dorm. For 2 days, I avoided the football wing entirely, choosing longer routes across campus, burying myself in assignments that suddenly felt urgent. But avoidance didn't quiet the thoughts. It sharpened them. Every pause in my routine filled with the memory of his voice, the weight of that unfinished conversation, when Lucas texted me, "Can we talk again?" I don't think I explained myself well. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. He didn't mention Emily. He didn't need to. Her absence in his words was already becoming a pattern that I went back. This time, the dorm felt smaller, more intimate. The lights were dimmed, the trophies still lining the walls like silent witnesses. Lucas didn't pretend this was casual. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees, as if bracing for impact. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About not wanting to be a mistake." "And?" I asked, "And I think I already am one," he replied. "Just not in the way people assume." Lucas talked about Emily then, finally using her name. He spoke with respect, almost reverence. She was loyal. Patient. She believed in the version of him that showed up on game days and family dinners. The problem wasn't her. It was him. "I care about her," he said, voice low. "But sometimes it feels like I'm acting out a life I agreed to before I understood myself." I listened, knowing that understanding him didn't absolve either of us. Emotional honesty can be a form of intimacy, and intimacy can be a betrayal long before anyone touches. I felt the pull of being needed, of being seen as the person he trusted with his uncertainty. That role felt intoxicating, and wrong. "You shouldn't be saying this to me," I said. "I know," Lucas admitted. "But I don't know who else would listen without telling me who I'm supposed to be." There it was. The justification we both leaned on. He wasn't asking for permission to cheat, he was asking for permission to feel. The distinction mattered to him. It mattered less to my conscience. The room grew quiet. Lucas turned on a small speaker, letting soft music fill the spaces words no longer could. We sat side by side, not touching, but close enough to sense each other's presence. Every shift of his posture felt intentional, every breath measured. That I became aware of how easily emotional boundaries dissolve when no one names them. How silence can be an agreement if left unchecked. "I think about you," Lucas said suddenly. "Not often," he clarified. "Just enough to notice. Just enough to matter." The confession tightened something in my chest. "That's not fair," I replied, though I didn't specify to whom. Lucas nodded. "I know. And I hate that it feels honest." In that moment, I realized I had stopped being a listener and become a participant. Even without action, my presence altered his decisions. I was no longer neutral. I was a possibility. My phone vibrated between us, breaking the tension. Lucas glanced at it, then looked away. "It's Emily," he said. He didn't reach for the phone right away. That hesitation said more than any declaration could. He wasn't choosing me outright, but he wasn't choosing her either, not in that moment. The space between intention and action widened, and we stood in it together. "You should answer," I said quietly. "In a minute," he replied. That minute stretched. The music continued. The dorm felt suspended, as if time itself was waiting for a decision neither of us wanted to make. I thought about how infidelity is often described as a single act, a moment of weakness. But sitting there, I understood it differently. It was accumulation. A series of small choices that felt harmless on their own. Lucas finally picked up the phone and silenced it without reading the message. He exhaled slowly, eyes closed, as if bracing for regret. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said. I stood, needing distance before that confusion pulled me closer. "Then we need to stop pretending this is nothing." Lucas looked up at me, conflict etched into his expression. He didn't argue. He didn't agree. He only nodded, as if acknowledging a truth he wasn't ready to face. As I left the dorm that night, I felt no triumph, only a heavy awareness. Whatever line we hadn't crossed physically had already blurred beyond recognition. And somewhere, unknowingly, Emily was waiting for a message that represented loyalty neither of us was sure still existed. The story, I knew, was no longer about temptation. That it was about consequences that hadn't arrived yet, but were already on their way. I didn't hear from Lucas Carter for 3 days after that night that at first, the silence felt like relief. My routine returned to something familiar: classes, library hours, quiet meals eaten alone. But beneath that surface calm, everything felt altered, as if I were walking through a version of campus slightly out of sync with everyone else. I had stepped into something I couldn't undo, and the waiting became its own consequence. When Lucas finally asked to meet, he chose a neutral place, a bench behind the academic building, far from the dorms and the stadium. That choice told me more than his words ever could. He wasn't trying to hide anymore, he was trying to face something that he looked exhausted. The confidence that usually clung to him like armor seemed thinner, worn down by nights of indecision. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. I talked to Emily. Lucas said that I didn't ask how it went. I already knew it hadn't been easy. I didn't tell her everything, he continued, staring at the ground. But I told her enough to admit I haven't been honest, with her or myself. There was no pride in his voice, only gravity. Lucas explained that Emily had listened quietly, her disappointment sharper than anger. She had asked him a simple question: who are you trying to protect by staying silent? He didn't have an answer then. He still didn't. I used you as a mirror, Lucas said finally, looking at me. Not intentionally. But I did. You showed me parts of myself I've been avoiding. The honesty stung more than accusation would have. And what happens now? I asked. Lucas exhaled slowly. Now I stop pretending that confusion excuses harm. He told me he needed distance, not just from me, but from the version of his life that demanded certainty he didn't yet have. Emily had asked for space, and for once, he hadn't argued. The relief he described felt complicated, laced with loss. That I realized then that I wasn't the center of this story. I was a catalyst. That distinction mattered. It allowed me to accept responsibility without claiming importance I hadn't earned. I should have stepped back sooner, I said. Yes, Lucas replied. But so should I. There was no bitterness in his agreement, only acceptance. That mutual clarity felt like closure, even if it came too late to prevent damage. We sat in silence, not the charged quiet of the dorm room, but something cleaner, uncomfortable, honest. I don't regret meeting you, Lucas said. But I regret not setting boundaries before someone else paid the price. I nodded. That regret was something I shared. Infidelity, I had learned, wasn't always loud or reckless. Sometimes it was careful, considerate, and still devastating. When we stood to leave, Lucas extended his hand, then hesitated, letting it fall back to his side. The restraint felt appropriate. We didn't need gestures to mark the end of what we'd never named. After that day, I kept my distance. Not out of resentment, but out of respect, for Emily, for Lucas, and for myself. I stopped romanticizing what had happened. Desire didn't make it noble. Vulnerability didn't make it harmless. Weeks passed. Rumors circulated, as they always do, but none of them captured the truth. They never do. The real story lived in quiet decisions and conversations no one else witnessed. That I began to understand something essential: self-discovery doesn't grant permission to hurt others. Identity is a journey, not a justification. And attraction, no matter how sincere, doesn't absolve responsibility. Sometimes, I still see Lucas across campus. We exchange polite nods, nothing more. He looks lighter now, though less certain. I like to believe that uncertainty is more honest than the certainty he wore before. As for me, I carry the lesson forward. I learned that being chosen in secret isn't the same as being valued in the light. That emotional closeness, when misplaced, can fracture lives just as deeply as any physical act. This story didn't end with a dramatic confession or a forbidden romance fulfilled. It ended with restraint, accountability, and the quiet acceptance that some connections exist to teach, not to last. And though the consequences arrived softly, they arrived all the same, leaving behind a truth I won't forget: the hardest lines to respect are often the ones you can't see until you've already crossed them. Time has a way of softening sharp edges without erasing them. By mid-semester, the campus had moved on. New gossip replaced old whispers, and the football season swallowed attention the way it always did. From the outside, Lucas Carter looked unchanged, still the captain, still admired. But distance teaches you to see differently. From afar, I noticed how often he stood alone now, how his laughter seemed measured instead of effortless, that we hadn't spoken since that afternoon by the academic building. The silence between us wasn't hostile, it was deliberate. I understood now that some connections end not because they explode, but because continuing them would cause further harm. Letting go was the only honest choice left. Emily's name surfaced occasionally in conversations I overheard. People speculated, filling gaps with imagination. No one knew the truth, and I didn't correct them. This wasn't my story to claim publicly. Accountability doesn't require an audience. I focused inward instead. I questioned why being needed had felt so validating, why I had mistaken emotional closeness for permission. I wasn't proud of my role, but I refused to bury it under excuses. Growth, I learned, comes from naming your mistakes without turning them into an identity. One evening, weeks later, I ran into Lucas outside the library. It was unplanned, unavoidable. He stopped first, uncertainty flickering across his face. For a moment, I considered pretending I hadn't seen him. But avoidance had already taught me its limits. Ethan, he said. Lucas. The exchange was simple, restrained. Yet beneath it lay everything we weren't saying. He looked healthier, steadier. Not happier, just more grounded. I wanted to thank you, Lucas said after a pause. For what? I asked. For walking away, he replied. I didn't understand it then. I do now. The honesty surprised me, but it didn't reopen old wounds. If anything, it confirmed they were healing. It was the right thing, I said. Even if it didn't feel like it at the time. Lucas nodded. Emily and I, we're not together anymore. That decision had nothing to do with you in the end. It had to do with me finally admitting what I wasn't ready to face. I absorbed that quietly. Relief and sadness coexisted without conflict. His clarity didn't absolve the past, but it reframed it. I hadn't ruined something whole, I had exposed something already fractured. I hope you're figuring things out, I said. So do I, Lucas replied with a faint smile. For the first time, that feels honest. We parted without promises, without nostalgia. Some stories don't need revisiting to be meaningful. They need understanding. As I walked away, I realized something else had shifted. I no longer defined myself by being someone's secret. I didn't crave validation from being chosen quietly. I wanted openness, even if it took longer to find. Infidelity had taught me that love built in shadows eventually collapses under its own weight. That emotional shortcuts lead to long regrets. And that integrity often asks for sacrifices that feel unfair in the moment but make sense in hindsight. I don't know where Lucas's journey will lead him. I only know where mine is going now. Toward honesty. Toward connections that don't require hiding. Toward a version of myself that doesn't confuse empathy with obligation. Some nights, I still think about that first invitation, the dorm room, the trophies, the silence thick with possibility. It would be easy to romanticize it, to imagine an alternate ending where desire won and consequences didn't exist, but that story wouldn't be true. The truth is quieter, heavier, and more valuable. It's the understanding that not every intense connection is meant to be pursued, and not every feeling deserves action. Sometimes, the most meaningful choice is the one that leaves you alone, but intact, and if this story continues, as all lives do, it won't be built on secrecy. It will be built on lessons learned the hard way, and the hope that next time, I'll choose clarity before temptation has the chance to speak.